Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I'm not sure if I agree with that, though.
So you're saying you think that the author, like of Genesis, meant to present God uh, as causing the evil, like he, in that sense, that. Welcome to the Faith in Question podcast. We're talking to Clinton, who's from Savannah, Georgia, right, Clinton?
Yes.
But you don't sound like the way I expected someone from Savannah, Georgia, to sound. I don't. Is it just the movies? This is the why people sound the way they
Well,
do.
I
Or do a
wasn't
lot of
wasn't
people
born and
sound?
raised here.
Oh, okay.
So I was.
Where are you from?
I'm originally from Orlando, Florida, which doesn't really have an accent because it's extremely diverse.
Yes, that explains it.
Yeah, so there's that, and I was in the military, and my last duty station was at Hunter Army Airfield, which is aviation, helicopters, and stuff.
Yeah.
So once I got out, I liked it better here than Orlando. So, extremely less traffic and just much more relaxing and quiet.
Nice.
With still with the city feel.
What we're doing with Faith in Question is we're dialoguing with the non-believing about their perspectives on religion, and then delving into the issues that are really foundational and probably ultimately for most people to decide whether they believe or not. And Clinton, your story is a story of deconversion, raised in a Christian context, and then having left the faith. So why don't you start us down that path and give us kind of a thumbnail sketch of how that went?
Yeah. So growing up, when I was very young, my mom would bring us to church, usually like a Baptist church or something similar. As someone who went to Baptist and Methodist church, there are, quite a bit of similarities, but there's also a lot of differences. But it was usually one of those, and wasn't ever like a very serious thing. It was like serious to my mom, and she would always like thank God for stuff and bring up God casually, but we didn't do like a lot of Bible studies. We didn't say grace every time at dinner, stuff like that. But yeah, it was very much a part of our lives. It was just it was just a real thing. It's something I just took as, this is just how the world works. This is what I was taught. She never forced anything on me, but I was very much involved in Bible camps and going to church very often. Whenever I was a teenager, and I got my car at, I believe I was 15, and you can get a learner's permit and drive yourself around. And I started going to church on my own, and most of my friends were from church, so it was a very big deal. I got heavily involved with the youth leadership, and I was going to probably at least 5 events a week, and also hanging out with my friends there in between events. So I was at church. I was either at school or I was at church almost all the time.
This is the same sort of Baptist church?
So this was, now it's like a mega church, and you could probably find out what their denomination is.
Yeah.
But it was Faith Assembly of God in Orlando, Florida, and much larger church than it was when I went to it. It was a large church, but after I had moved away and stopped going to it, they actually moved locations and became much bigger. But yeah, that's the church I got heavily involved with, and yeah, I was going Sunday morning, Sunday night was like the college aid service, which I would help out with. Wednesday night was youth service. Saturday night was what they called the River, which was just a 2-hour prayer session. And sometimes I would go for other things like fine arts events, if you're familiar with that. And I went on missions trips every summer, so I was very much involved. And that was not anything that like I said, my mom forced on me. It was a part of my social. It was what I did. Sorry, I keep hearing my dog trying to.
Oh yeah, that's fine. And
push
this is into your late teens, I guess.
Yeah, so about 15 to 19, and around 20 is whenever I had moved away And I was going to a Methodist church at that point, because it's the church that my partner's family went to at that time. And she later became my wife. But yeah, so whenever I was about 20, and I was going to another church at this point, and I had already become engaged, which is kind of important. But I've always had doubts pretty much even since I was in my teens and heavily involved in everything, but I kind of just pushed through, and God works in mysterious ways and all that, and kept suppressing my doubts. And I would pray for answers. And around the age of, I want to say 20, it might have been earlier or slightly later, but I really just wanted to be honest with myself. And I started with I don't know, because that was the most honest I could have. And I had a lot of disagreements that I always felt uncomfortable with the Bible and things that were taught in the church. So once
These were not just theological disagreements, they were other things?
yeah, theological and not theological, and like,
Okay.
well, I don't know how you would define certain things, but like, equality, basically, and homosexuality in the Bible, and how they treat women in the Bible, and slavery and all that, and there's a lot of other stuff, genocide, that I had a lot of problems with and couldn't resolve that.
This is as you're growing up in your teens.
Yeah, I read the Bible a lot, and I found a lot of problems that I disagreed with, and I was, always looking for answers and trying to talk to people about it, and never really got anything satisfying. So, once I started looking at the world, and I kind of got rid of everything, kind of like Descartes. I just raised everything and started over, and once I looked at the world from the perspective without God, things made a lot more sense to me. And I've kind of stayed with that ever since. And it was just a lot more comfortable, and I felt, we can kind of get into the other questions later, but yeah, pretty much around the age of 20, I just really started to become a lot more introspective and analytical, and deconverted from that.
And how long has it been roughly?
About 15 years.
Okay. And you were married at the time?
Yeah, so I deconverted before I got married, but that was a really big wedge in the relationship, and I was always willing to talk to her about it, but anytime we would have a discussion, it was kind of just me like laying out everything I felt on the table, and she didn't really know how to respond, and she was still very much of like, I don't know, but I'm supposed to believe, so I will, just kind of mindset. Mm-hmm. And for a number of reasons later down the line, about like, I want to say 5 or 6 years later, we got separated and eventually divorced. And I'm with a new partner now, but
No children? You didn't have children?
no.
Okay. When you think back on the doubts and disagreements and so on you were having, what were one or two of the big ones?
I never really felt comfortable with. I remember telling people like I just didn't agree with homosexuality or that lifestyle without even really understanding what I'm saying. I was just kind of parroting stuff that I heard, or that was taught. So I have a lot of friends LGB, and just kind of telling them that.
You mean at the time you had a lot of friends?
Even at the time I did, yeah. Like in school and stuff, and just having like this internal conflict of like, well, it's a sin and all that, and I felt guilty, and didn't know what to do about it. And then, there's just a lot of problematic things in the Bible.
Just for clarity on that, I'm a little bit lost right now. You're saying that you disagreed with what the Bible said about LGBT issues?
Yeah, and what I was being taught, yeah, that it was basically just like wrong and immoral and all of that. And I didn't understand how, if someone just loves someone else, why it would be
Yep.
immoral. And, you know, there, I never really believed in the, at the time, which people usually don't say this now, but people like, oh, choosing to be gay. And it's like, it's not a choice. I don't know why anyone would choose to be disenfranchised from society and bullied and all of that. You don't really choose who you're attracted to or who you love, and so that was a big one. The slavery was a big one. Women's equality was a big one. Just a lot of yeah, and I don't want to throw too much out at once because I don't know how this normally goes, but there was a lot of problems I had with the Bible.
Yeah, I was going to say the first thing that strikes me is that there are moral issues, right, that relate to the way. They're particularly hot moral topics today for our generation. Yeah. Our generation, meaning, the past century, because they're, for the most part, those seem like more like modern moral dilemmas that would rise naturally. That do rise naturally, rather than say something like you didn't mention the resurrection or did Jesus cast out demons or whatever. At least that's not, you didn't mention those things. They were more of the moral dilemmas. Is that the way? Is that just what came out, or is that was that the truth?
If I were to sit down and write down everything that I had a problem with, there'd be a lot of different categories. The first I brought up was basically stuff that is like more, politicized, but all of the supernatural claims I also had a problem with. And a lot of the, historical claims and just trust us, it's real. Or, you hear from some people that everything in the Bible is literally true, which seems really far-fetched. Or some things are metaphor. Like, well, how do you know what's a metaphor and what's not? Everyone is interpreting the Bible completely differently. There's hundreds of different denominations of Christianity, and they don't, oftentimes they don't, mix well. They have really big disagreements. So who's right? And none of it really made sense. And I prayed for answers on everything that didn't make sense. And I prayed, and the only thing that did make sense is that none of that was just real to me. And once I looked at the world from that perspective, everything made a lot more sense. So if God does exist, then he made a universe and he made a world where living without him makes a lot more sense to me. And that's just kind of weird. And, it's like if this is a part of his plan for him to be confusing and mysterious and basically make me completely doubt his existence despite growing up being indoctrinated and believing in him, then so be it.
Yeah. Were there of those things, and maybe there wasn't, it probably wasn't just some nice linear coherent set of steps or stages or whatever, but would you say that the moral issues were more pressing initially, just the way, I'm just going by based on how you characterized it, I'm trying to get at the truth of it, and then later came sort of the doubts and supernatural stuff, or were they just sort of mixed together, you think, along the way?
I think it was mixed together. It's hard to kind of pinpoint, which problematic things came first. There was a lot, and they all culminated into, just, is this at all true?
Right.
So I don't know what came first, and I'm not sure if it was like a snowball or anything like that. I'm not sure, like, I don't know if it's important to kind of nail down which one came first for me. But what kind of led to the end was just the culmination of everything not making sense.
And how long do you think that was?
I mean, I was having doubts probably as soon as I started getting heavily involved in the church, like whenever I was 15. And the more I got involved, because I was like just looking for answers, and I figured, if I just really give it my all and do everything I can to be a good Christian, that things will be revealed to me and things will eventually make sense if I just stick to it. And the more I read the Bible, the more I disagreed with it.
Did you, were there things that there must have been some things that you were hanging on to or wanted to believe were still true or something to that effect, I guess? I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but what would have been some of the things, maybe the right question is, what were some of the final things that were harder to give up on?
Well, whenever you leave a religion, there's like a lot of infrastructure that you kind of build your life around and social constructs. So you're leaving like a whole community. And even if you like want to continue being friends with a lot of them, once they see that you've deconverted, they don't really want anything to do with you at that point. So that was kind of the hardest, was just like leaving all these people, a lot of people I thought I was like really close with and wanted to have like discussions with and kind of talk about my struggles with my faith. And they kind of wanted nothing to do with it. These people that I had spent a lot of time with, had gone to other countries with, and then, it's kind of like they look at you like you have a disease if you're not believing. That was the hardest part, probably.
Like the social loss, social shame, social separation.
I remember with my wife at the time, her church, I went to one of the leaders there, and it was actually the guy who gave premarital counseling, because if you do premarital counseling, you get like a cheaper marriage license or whatever. And I had gone through that class with her, and I was talking to him and kind of voicing some of the problems I had at the time. And I don't remember exactly what I brought up, but I was just basically saying, like, I'm looking for answers and I don't know what's going on. And I don't forget what his response was, though, was he said, "It sounds like you already made up your mind." And he was immediately defensive. And I pulled him aside. It was like a one-on-one thing. I wasn't talking to him in front of other people. So I don't know why he got really defensive, because I was coming to him for help. But that was probably like the worst possible answer someone could give. But of all the people I talked to, no one really had any satisfying answers. And, a lot of it was like, just pray about it and it will be revealed and stuff like that. And it wasn't. And I prayed for hours on end for many months.
You weren't, did you at that time, or were you at any point looking into, the sort of corpus of C.S. Lewis or whatever, the things that people tend to go to for the defense of Christian belief? A lot of people use C.S. Lewis across multiple denominations, as kind of like a resource. Or was that not really a part of your experience?
I don't think I read C.S. Lewis until probably like long after I deconverted. I read some of his stuff, but
were there apologists or something that people pointed to, or you found online or something?
So actually, that was something that I did a lot. Was I was looking at a lot of like debates and a lot of apologists, because I was trying to think of how to defend all these questions I had, and I'm like, well, I'm not the first one to think of these, so there's obvious the answers to these things. So I started getting into apologetics and learning how to defend my faith because of the problems I had. But once I did that, the apologists would kind of give their answers, and then the atheists would give their rebuttals, and that side just made way more sense to me. So that actually kind of helped aid in my deconversion, because it's like whenever I looked at both side by side, I came in probably with the wrong intentions of how I examine my beliefs. Is I'm always looking for a challenge, but what I was looking for at that time was for someone to like reaffirm me, for someone to give me like, hey, I'm struggling. How do I believe this better? And it just made more sense that what I was thinking was wrong.
And you weren't? Did you read a book or two or anything, or it was all just like online stuff?
It was mostly online apologetics stuff.
Any
It's that one
particular
website. What was that?
any particular atheist play a stronger role than another?
I'm trying to remember some of the earliest debates that I went to, but no, I mean it was mostly just people debating with, like, I remember like William Lane Craig, and I've watched so many debates. It's hard to remember what are the first ones I watched as far as like apologetics goes. And William Lane Craig, I never really liked his arguments, by the way, but I respect him as a person and all that. But it was mostly a lot of websites of like, now the atheist might say this, but this is how you would respond and whatever. And I was like, well, that doesn't make any sense to me. Like, I don't want to just parrot what someone else is saying. I want to understand it myself. And whenever I examined it, I feel like I keep repeating this, so I'm sorry if I sound like a broken record, but all of the apologetic stuff just did not make any sense, and it kind of like felt like reaches, and there was a lot of special pleading, and there's just a lot of like fallacious arguments that didn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I'm sure just remembering, of course, I took the opposite journey, right? I started atheist, mm-hmm. and around the same time of life, I converted to Christianity. And it was sort of, for me, it was celebratory, I guess, if you want to say it that way, or it was, there was a lot of optimism and hope, and, that filled my life in coming to Christianity. What was it like for you in leaving? How would you characterize that?
I kind of feel the same. I feel like anytime you make a major epistemological change in your life, and you feel like things are starting to look more clear, psychologically you're going to have a lot more optimism, because you feel like you finally found like the answer, and the road ahead looks more clear. I kind of feel like anyone converting or deconverting to any religion would probably feel that way, unless it was, if they're changing because of like trauma, maybe. But oftentimes it's, it's like being the call to action. You go to church, and then at the end they're like, if anyone would like to come down and give your life to Christ, and that can be like a really emotional feeling, and that can feel really good, and it's designed that way. And I feel like as soon as you feel like now there is hope, it would be a very optimistic thing. And I kind of feel that way for my deconversion, because it's like I had all of this doubt and nothing ever made sense. And now that I'm looking at it from this perspective, and it's like taking the rose tinted glasses off, seeing the world for how it is. Now I can finally go about the world and think about things on my own, and I actually have reasons for everything I believe in. And I feel like the most powerful answer that you can give to most of life's questions is I don't know. And I feel like that is something that is scary for a lot of people. human beings would much rather make up an answer, and it's a lot more comforting to just have an answer than to just accept that they don't know something. And it's where you come up with things like Zeus. Like, why do we have, lightning? Oh, well, Zeus is throwing down lightning bolts, of course. And I'm pretty sure you don't believe in Zeus, but you can understand why someone would want an answer to something without actually understanding it.
Yeah. There's a great play by Aristophanes called The Clouds, where it's I'll spare you the whole plot, but basically it's sort of mocking the idea of trying to defend Zeus by virtue of the fact that he causes the rain or lightning or what have you. But it's interesting because it's an ancient play, right? It's an ancient Greek play where it's sort of mocking that idea of God, as if that's the grounds on which we know that God exists. And just to say, it's a very old, the sort of God of the gaps type argument is very old and was mocked by even an ancient Greek playwright. But of course, a lot of the Greek philosophers were theists, but they didn't believe in Zeus, but they were theists for different reasons. Not because of just because they thought it explained a lightning bolt. Would you say that? I guess because in one sense you're sort of unburdened then, because instead of feeling like you have to believe something you don't really deep down believe, you're able to just kind of let it go and not feel like you're pressured to believe something you otherwise just think is not true. And I know for me that's always really important. Just even as a Christian, I still find myself feeling, maybe because I've come in later into Christianity, that I am aware that a lot of Christians seem very quick to not always want hard questions. And I find it very, like, it's not really in my wheelhouse to just pretend I believe something or I understand, or maybe I should say that I understand something when I really don't. So I tend to be pretty dogged about trying to understand what's going on, and not feeling burdened by that. I remember years ago someone giving an answer for what explained the differences in the genealogies of Jesus between Matthew and Luke's gospel accounts, and I just didn't find it very satisfying. And but I was aware that a lot of Christians seemed to. It was sort of like, that's the answer. Don't question it. And I thought, yeah, I can't really do that. And I didn't feel that, and nor did I feel any pressure to personally. It just wasn't the type of Christians I was hanging around with, is that I felt I needed to pretend that an answer was really good if it just wasn't that good. What was your outlook then? What replaced that previous Christian worldview? What did that become then?
So, kind of like I said, I'm sure you're very familiar with the story of Descartes and how he raised the ground, with his beliefs. And before I even really knew much about Descartes, I feel like I went along a similar journey where it's like, let me start from nothing. What do I know? And what makes sense? And I feel like I'm a very open-minded person, which is part of the reason why I deconverted. But it's like, a lot of political topics. I'm constantly looking now at the challenges to what I believe, because otherwise you just find yourself in an echo chamber, and I'm not really ever interested in just agreeing with someone and talking to someone that I agree with. Much rather talk to people that I disagree with and understanding their point of view. And I feel like that's the best way to kind of come to the truth, is to constantly challenge your beliefs and always looking at the opposing sides. And I feel like that's a really good way, as far as whenever it comes to moral questions, philosophical questions, when it comes to just, predictable, like science. Science doesn't look for the truth. Science looks for predictable answers, right? If you do this experiment these should be the results. We've done this experiment 198 times, and 190 of them came out with this. 8 because of this or that reasons, but it's never looking for the truth in my eyes. Science just looks for what's predictable explanations of the universe, and I feel like that is as close to the truth that you can get. So there's two different ways as far as it comes to like knowing why the universe works and stuff. There's science, but as far as understanding philosophical things, moral things, what side of a particular topic is right. The best way to do that is to just constantly look at the opposing side until you find one that resonates more with you.
Do you think that what would do you have like a name for how you would say your outlook? Is it a scientific outlook, or I don't know, do you think of, like, people talk about worldviews, right? Christian worldview or what have you. Do you have a particular way of describing your outlook?
So what I find myself talking about the most lately is philosophy and, moral and political stuff. And from there, I don't really use science unless it's particularly, pragmatic. So it's, climate change, I might lean towards science more. But I would say compassion, honestly, and just, I almost want to say human first, but, I care about all living beings. But I feel like compassion and being extremely thoughtful and understanding of other people is how I try to reach my conclusions. So, it's really easy to like look at an argument and on paper it looks really good if you don't think about the individual that it affects, right? It's very much like why I'm anti-war. It's like, oh, well, we could solve this problem if we just go to war with these people, but you're not thinking of the actual individual of those, every single person. You're looking at it as like a group of people instead of breaking it down to each person. So I feel like a lot of what I believe now just comes down to compassion and what helps the most people. And unfortunately, I feel like most of the world looks at things as like an us versus them instead of just trying to figure out what helps people. They just want to help their people. They don't want to help people. They want to help whoever's like them. And I want to try to help everyone, even if I disagree with you, even if I don't like who you are or like what you believe in or anything like that. I want what's best for everyone.
Do you think, I'm sure you won't be surprised for me to say this, but it sounds like a very fundamentally sort of Christian outlook, right? Morally, to love your neighbor as yourself.
I feel like you could definitely find passages that would align with that, but I could just as many passages as I could say, well, this sounds Christian when you look at it from this passage. I could say, well, it doesn't sound Christian when you look at it from this other passage. So I don't like to attribute it to any particular religion, because I could find a number of religions and I could tell you why exactly what I just said sounds like an Islamic approach, sounds like a Christian approach, sounds like a Buddhist approach. I could probably find any religion and tell you why, this comes from this kind of approach if you really cherry pick certain things. I feel like something I probably align with the most philosophically. There's probably something I disagree with, but Stoicism is a really big one for me. I have trouble finding things that I disagree with when it comes to that. But
just for the listeners, Stoicism goes back to the ancient Greeks. It's a classical idea, of course, that became very popular under the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, and I just so have to mention it as a classicist,
Yeah, I figured you would appreciate that. Yes.
Yeah, I'm sort of grounded in the idea that's at least somewhat theistic Stoicism, in the sense that the idea of that there's one mind at the origin, that's sort of at the responsible, or is the origin of the universe, meaning that things are directed, not a personal God. I don't mean the idea of Jehovah or Jesus, something like that. But I just mean it's sort of, I don't know, it's quasi-deistic or something like that. It's often grounded in something bigger. So I guess one question I have is, do you think that this idea of compassion is, I'm not saying you would, by the way, adhered to that. I'm just saying, is the idea of compassion, you think, something which is like it's really part of the moral fabric of the universe in some way, even immaterially, or is it just a private? You just think this is the way you are, and there's other people in the world who are going to be pro-war and just not think like, if you haven't noticed, there's a lot of people there's a lot of wars, and
Yeah.
they don't seem to ever end. So,
So as far as like moral fabric, I'm not really sure if anything like that exists. If there's like any, you know, like universal truths or anything like that, as when it comes to like morality. There's a lot of complicated topics, and it's really hard to. That's why discussions are important. Is to kind of, we're not smart enough to really figure it all out as an individual, but together we might be able to eventually reach a universal conclusion of what's right and what's wrong. So maybe there is, but
so you do you think of like faith-based, like the way the way Christians talk about faith? How do you view that now? Just the very idea of faith.
Faith to me is kind of what you might lean on if you don't have another good reason. Because if you had a good reason to believe in something, you would just give that reason. And for everything else, there's faith. So I don't really... and I'm speaking of faith in the way that most Christians I've talked to. It's also a very ambiguous term. So I would ask you to define your version of it first, but in my opinion, faith is just what you have if you don't have a good reason to believe in something.
Yeah, I think that is the way a lot of Christians talk or use the term faith that way. I think I was more trying to get at the sort of biblical idea of belief. Like in the Bible, it doesn't seem to me like Jesus' ministry is meant to be, he gives no reasons to believe in him, and you're just supposed to accept it. Even though I hear Christians talk like that sometimes, I think, the Gospels themselves are pretty clear that Jesus does a bunch of stuff that convinces people he is who he is, or at least convinces a number of people who he is. So it's not as though it's like evidenceless. There's no evidence or no reasons to draw people to believe, to conclude he's the Messiah and so on. So even though I do hear what you're saying, certainly Christians at times I hear talk about faith in the way you described it, it doesn't seem to me like in the Bible it's typically, or at least the way I'm just characterizing the Gospels, that's certainly not the way that when they're talking about believe the gospel, they're giving plenty of reasons and evidence and so on.
Yeah.
At least the account of the original people who come to believe. So I was just kind of curious how would you respond to that?
Yeah, there's been a lot of books written about figures who claim that they are some kind of religious person, different prophets, and all of that is first, second, third-hand account of something that may or may not have happened, written many years after someone even is supposed to have existed. So yeah, if you're with some guy and he says that he is the Son of God, or he's performs these miracles in front of you, it might be a little bit more convincing thinking that he is some kind of powerful entity, or he has some kind of neutral supernatural power. But then if you're talking to somebody and they're telling you that they met a guy who knew a guy that performed these miracles, then at that point it's like, okay, sure, I wouldn't believe them in a heartbeat, because it's like, you're just telling me what someone else said that they can do, or that, this many people removed say that they saw something. That's not really good evidence or anything like that. So yeah, back then, if these characters in the Bible were witnessing this evidence, then that might be the reason why they would believe in something like that. It's not convincing to me.
Right. At that point, it's hearsay, right? You're reading a book about what supposedly happened. Do you think that when we read history in general, historical accounts, Caesar's Gallic Wars or something, that that we're having to do the same kind of believing, or is it different? Because obviously we're not there. It's 2,000 years ago. We didn't. The evidence for Caesar's conquest of Gaul or whatever.
Yeah. It's kind of like, so.
Or is it just the nature? Is it just that the nature of it is so different? I'm trying to really get at the word belief. By the way, I'm not really trying to challenge what you've said. I'm just trying to get at, is that also believing when we read Caesar, or is that different?
So no, I feel like it's the same, but there's more evidence for it. And you still have to take. You kind of have to take everything in history, unfortunately, with a grain of salt, because history is often written by the winners, and you can look at a police report with 3 different eyewitnesses, and none of those, line up with each other. And now you're talking about things that were written by the, typically whoever won that conflict a long time ago. A majority of history as written in the books is probably factually wrong when it comes to very specific points. Is there a lot of truth in them? Sure. Is there a lot of falsities? Most likely. So how do you go about believing in that? I mean, it's like it's like what you say about science. You just kind of have to, like, this is what the best current understanding of what happened was, but we're not saying that this is 100% the truth. This is just what our understanding of what happened was.
How do you think we can do that with, what can we do with the Gospels then? Or what's your take now on how you deal with them?
I mean, I don't believe in a majority of it. So, and whenever I say I don't believe in something, it's not that I think it's necessarily untrue. It's kind of just like my belief in God. It's that there are a lot of people claiming that there is truth to it. And I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm just saying I'm not convinced yet. And everyone has heard of a majority of people have heard of the courtroom analogy, where when you say someone is not guilty, you're not saying that they're innocent. You're just saying that you're not convinced that they're guilty. And I don't find the Gospels guilty of convincing me that they're true at all. The amount of contradictions that I find that have been, I don't find the explanations of the contradictions to be satisfying.
You make what I mean is just assuming you're not assuming kind of obviously, right, that you're not going to believe a lot of what's being recorded. I'm just saying, what parts of it do you think, I guess, are true, or what do you make of it? Do you say, well, it's probably this is basically the true part of it?
So I would compare it to, you brought up Marcus Aurelius earlier. His meditations, it was a journal that he never thought would be published. It was just his own thing. That was something that he wrote down. These were his thoughts, what he believed in, his takes on events, right? His ideas, stuff like that. And I feel like whenever you look at any book That's kind of like what you're doing is you're looking at the author of that book, what his version, what his take was, how he interpreted that. And I would say he or she, but I'm talking about most of the books of the Bible is mostly, if not all, male. So that's kind of how you have to look at any book, including the 66 of the Bible. Is you look at it from the author's perspective. This is what their understanding is, or what they heard, and a lot of them have wrote about things that they already believed in. So if you're already believing that someone can turn a staff into a snake, and someone tells you that this happened, then you're like, oh, okay, well, let me jot that down. That is what happened then. But if you're not someone that believes in that, and someone told you that, I'm like, well, I'm probably not just going to include that, because that's BS. I don't believe in that. So that's how I would view the Gospels, and in any book of history, really, is you have to look at it from the position of who wrote it, and the interpretation of who wrote it, and all the context that goes within that. So it's like a lot of people thought like Shakespeare was progressive when he wrote Othello, because he's writing about... It's like, I don't personally believe that. I think he just wrote on whatever the hot topics were of the time. And he just took a story that was written about 50 years earlier. Elizabeth had put out this degree about people, and he was like, well, this is a hot topic. I'm going to write about Othello, the Moor of Venice. Everything is just the context of the author and whoever's writing it.
Do you think that it's like there's other historians, right? Roman historians, Jewish historian Josephus, who comment on Jesus. Do you feel like those at least confirm that some parts of the story or the story arc are true, or you haven't looked at that stuff closely enough to really form a judgment on it?
So, like whether or not Jesus existed.
Just, I mean, his story arc, the references in some of the Roman historians and writers who reference Jesus, and then Josephus, of course, famously. They're outside of the Gospels, right? So they're at least not the Gospel writers. And I'm just curious if you feel like that. And you may not have looked at it that closely, I don't know. I'm just asking if you have. Do you feel like that in some ways confirms the basic story arc? Or you're not sure? So
at a time, I looked at it more closely, and a lot of that was probably over 10 years ago, to be honest.
Sure.
That's
fine.
But
you need to answer.
Well, I mean, so even then, though, it's sorry. I actually had something I wanted to say, but yeah. So I had looked into all this stuff, but it's whether or not a lot of these things happened. The stuff that I might find true isn't really that important as far as me not being a historian. But the stuff with like the miracles and stuff, I just don't see like real evidence of that. I don't think there is enough evidence of it compared to, say, like the wars and stuff like that, where there's like a lot more different accounts of it.
Yeah, it's obviously much bigger things to believe that we don't. They're miracles, right? So they're not things we see.
Yeah.
At the very least, it's understandable to be skeptical. Plus, there's other ancient books with miracles too. So that even Christians will disregard or probably not take seriously. Does it matter? You'll often hear Christians say that, well, the apostles died for these things. They believe these things, but they actually died for them. Some of the earliest Christians, were martyred. So does that add credibility or make it more believable, or not? Not necessarily.
Not at all. Because you could... The problem is we have so many counterexamples to look at where there are people that have died for many causes that they believe in that are completely contradictory to Christian belief. So you have a lot of cult members that have died doing what they believe in, and it's completely contradictory to what Christians believe. You have many people of other religions that have died refusing to change their mind or to say anything. I recently actually... the problem is my...
Just for clarity, that would mean it was like a sincere belief is what you mean. that they sincerely believed Jesus was raised from the dead, but they were just wrong, rather than that they knew it was wrong and died?
It would be a case by case basis, but I'm sure some of them were sincere. Yeah, but it doesn't mean that they were right. But yeah.
What were you going to say?
No, I just think, that just to answer your question, I believe it that possibly was sincere, but not necessarily right. That was pretty much the end of that statement.
I don't have a it's like some built up apologetics type of argument or something on all that. I just was curious if it mattered that the disciples died, and they seemed to, if they sincerely believed he was raised from the dead. One view would be that they didn't actually see him like bodily. They didn't have dinner like the gospel writers say, because that clearly would be too. It doesn't seem realistic that you had dinner and breakfast with somebody and you were just mistaken or hallucinated or something.
Mm-hmm.
If you had like a vision or a dream or something, that would be more understandable. Like you thought you saw a person who was dead. That's not uncommon in history, that people think they've seen someone who died.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I was just curious if that, just how like you would see the belief of Christians, in these things, or is that faith like a, do you see yourself now as basically you don't really use faith or the way you did?
No, I'd say everything that I believe in, I have a good reason for. And I think what I was going to touch on earlier is I was trying to recall. I actually had I saw this really good discussion about exactly what you were talking about people dying for their beliefs and the sincere belief. But I'll have to email you maybe later about that if I can remember what it was from.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like
people die for their sincere beliefs all the time. That's not surprising. That's why I was asking about it, is whether you thought it made a difference in the case of the disciples. That's all. Because you hear Christians will mention that, of course.
I don't. As your most recent question, though, I don't think there's anything in my life that I could really attribute to faith. I feel like everything is, like I said, I feel like I have a good reason to pretty much believe in everything I do. There's some kind of reason. I don't think there's anything that I would attribute to faith in the same way that Christians do now, or that I did as a Christian in the past.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that the idea of belief and faith are a little bit. Sometimes the way faith is used is on the assumption that it's always reckless, particularly when we're talking about religion. And it's usually pitted against science, as if there's no reasons for it. But there are ways in which we use the word faith, certainly the Bible uses it this way, where the faith seems like it's grounded in good reasoning. To have faith in a person on the basis of their character, we would say that can be a virtue, as long as the person's character actually bears out why you have faith in them,
Yeah, but then you're kind of... So... I feel like that's where you have to be careful about how you're defining faith at that point, because then I feel like you could interchange the word faith for something else. You could say evidence at that point. If someone has good character, then they have evidence of doing good things in the past, and that's why you would trust them to do. If someone shows up on time for work ever since you hired them, and then a year and a half later, they're late for some reason, you're not going to think that they're slacking off. You're probably going to think that something is wrong because of their character, their evidence, how they have acted in the past.
But you don't. I take it you're saying that you don't think the Bible uses faith in that way.
No. I feel like in any other way other than how I described it before, there are probably better words to use than faith. Because faith can be just a very ambiguous term. that can be all encompassing of something where there's much more clear words to use for clarity. And the problem with, like I said earlier, like I don't know is such a powerful and honest answer. And I feel like whenever you just take something on faith, the liability with that is basically people get into a sense of complacency or false certainty, and that can be kind of dangerous because once you teach someone to stop asking questions, that's never a good thing. I feel like you should always be skeptical. You should always be challenging your beliefs, and faith kind of stops that.
So I was thinking that that the Bible's, I wonder sometimes how much we're arguing about just a word. Like if you said to take something just on faith, it's a kind of expression I would say, yeah, that sounds like that's basically saying it's you may not have the best evidence for taking something on faith. It just depends on the context.
Yeah.
Certainly the idea of trust, which is another big word in the Bible, that is sometimes used in place of the word faith. Belief is sometimes used. Now we're just talking about English words, right? Not the original language, but the idea that a person had faith in Jesus, like when Jesus says, "Go heal somebody," and says that your faith saved you. It seems kind of clear in the context. It's not like they literally had no reason to come to him in the first place. Like they've come to him with their infirmity because they've either witnessed or heard that he's healing people, and they come to him for a reason. Like they don't seem like they're like truly just reckless. They've come to him because they hear he's healed people, or they meet somebody who's healed or something, and they think there's enough grounds for them to actually approach him and seek to be healed, and then they get healed, and he says, "Your faith saved you." So in those contexts, it seems to me that the idea of faith is not like this idea that it's like they're heading to Vegas, but there's some grounding for it.
So I feel like so many discussions get caught up in misunderstanding different messages. Like throughout this whole conversation, right? You've asked questions, and I feel like I was probably answering questions that you weren't asking because what you were intending to ask and how I interpreted what you were asking were two different things.
Sure.
And I apologize if that has happened a lot. I'm doing my best.
No, it's common in discussions. It's very common to try and you ask a question, and then you hear the answer and think, "Oh, I don't think I asked the right question," or something. You try to get a little better. Yeah.
But I mean, I think that's an important thing with with faith, though, right? So it's like in the context that you're using it. Let's take the last story you just said. Someone heard that Jesus was healing someone, and in the context of that story, they went to go see him. So why use the word faith in that context instead of, say, evidence? Or, if you hear from a number of people that something happened, then you're probably going to go in thinking that that's true. If I tell you that the movie War of the Worlds that just came out on Amazon is an absolutely terrible movie, then you're probably going to go into that thinking that this is probably not going to be a great movie. And by the way, it was absolutely horrible. I couldn't make it very far into it because of how terrible it was. But no offense to Ice Cube.
Yeah, in the case of that I was citing, I should just probably refer to a specific story, but I was thinking of the woman who followed Jesus in Mark chapter 5, but I could have gone to any of this. There's multiple stories, right, of the similar thing. But in those cases, it's not. What I was trying to get at, I think, is that forget my idea of faith. I'm just trying to talk about the actual text of the Gospels, that it's using the word faith. And in that sense, as a Christian, I'm going to look at that passage and say, well, faith in that story is not this like reckless, groundless, I don't even think about it, I have no reasons for it, I just accept it. That's not what faith means in that story. So as a Christian, why would I don't need to speak of faith always in the way people often do use it. I can use it in the way that story uses it. There's other stories where, Jesus says to the royal official, go your way, your son's alive. And the man has come to Jesus because he's from the city where Jesus turned the water into wine. And so he's come to him. He has some evidence. He has a sign, what John calls a sign. That's evidence. And he comes to him. And then Jesus tells him his son's alive. And he has no way to confirm it because he's not near his son. And it says he believed his word. And in that kind of a story, belief, believed, which is the same, you could translate it as have faith in. As far as Greek is concerned, the original language is just the same word for faith as the other story I quoted to you. In that case, the belief was not reckless for the guy in the sense that he had grounds, he had evidence to believe Jesus was capable of doing something miraculous or special. And when Jesus told him what to do, and it says the man believed, in that story, again, it's not like this, quote, take it on faith, don't think at all about it, don't question it or something like that. So I was trying to get at, with you talking about it, just sort of like, in those cases, it seems like faith isn't just, without evidence or without reason. But
Sure. So you're saying like, however they translated it, they could have interchangeably used believed in or faith.
Yeah, and same Greek words, yeah.
So do I have a problem with a story saying that someone believed in someone else? No.
No, what I'm trying to ask is that in those cases, it seems to me the word faith or the word belief, whichever word you want to use, is not really being used in the way initially you were defining faith. And I was agreeing with you earlier that Christians do sometimes use the word faith as in sort of like, there's no grounds for it, you just accept it. But those are stories in the Gospels where that's not clearly the meaning of the words, or they don't have that connotation in those stories. So I was thinking that faith, I don't think faith always in the Christian sense is that there's no evidence for it. Does that make sense?
Sure. But so if there's so much, so you would agree that a problem with all the disagreements with different denominations is how the word is interpreted, right? Is like how different people come to different conclusions based off of what they read. And with faith being kind of an ambiguous term that might have multiple meanings, there's probably just a better word to use then. And if you're trying to articulate a thought or an idea, faith probably just isn't a good word to use because of how wildly different people can interpret that.
Or, well, I mean, the translators obviously are just trying to render what the original story meant into English, right? And my inclination is to say that there's plenty of clarity that the word faith in the Bible is not this idea of just sort of reckless, evidenceless.
Yeah, often it's just like a type of trust, a complete trust.
That's right. And so that's what I was trying to get at, was I think the stories actually in the Bible normally don't just mean this sort of like, it's like a roulette wheel, there's no evidence for it. And I was saying that because we were originally talking about sort of how you understand faith now, how you see Christian faith, and you were just defining it a certain way, which again, I agreed with you that the way you were talking about it is often the way Christians do talk about faith, particularly if you have a question. Like if you challenge something that's important to Christianity, Christians will frequently say, you just have to take that on faith. And I get that there's things that Christians will say they don't understand, right? And they accept it on faith in the sense that they believe God has revealed it, then they have good reasons to believe
Yeah.
in God, and they don't, whatever. But
Which that also could be complete trust. Like, they just completely trust God. And so they will just trust that what he says is right, and without having any other good reason for it.
no, in the sense, I think I'd say no to that in the sense, Clinton, that they're at that point they're trusting God because they feel like, back to our original thing, description of how someone might have the type of character, or they've proven themselves another way, and they build up trust, and then you can trust them on things that you don't necessarily always understand, right?
Yeah.
Which you're going to do in your relationships and stuff.
If I made a supernatural claim, how much trust would you need in me? Like, let's say we were long-term. I have people I've known for ever since I was in high school that I still am in regular contact with, that I trust very much. I've known them for now over 20 years. I have some friends. And, if I would trust them to house sit, I would have complete trust in them to do a lot of things. And if they told me that they saw a ghost, for instance, I wouldn't just believe them.
Right.
Even though I have complete trust in them in most things. If they told me something that, happens regularly, then, if they said that they witnessed a lightning strike, an extremely rare occurrence, but that's something that happens, I would trust them with that. But if they said that they saw a ghost, I would need more evidence. Even if I've known that person for over 20 years, I would think that there's other things going on. There's other possible explanations than what they saw was indeed an actual ghost. Hallucinations exist. All this other stuff, there's so many possible explanations. I would need a bit more. I wouldn't just say, like, well, my long-term friend is saying that they for sure saw a ghost. I'm just going to trust him or have faith that he is right and that what he saw was a ghost. I'm going to think that, this person I've known for a very long time, he might be wrong.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that. What's your, what are you analogizing it to exactly?
I don't think Christians often will do the same thing. I think that if they were told something that normally they wouldn't believe, but because it's in the Christian context, they would more likely just believe it.
Yeah, for one, there's probably truth to that, but I guess you'd have to be specific, because I think of the stuff surrounding Jesus, say, is a lot more than just like a ghost story or one event. It's not a one-off event, just because it's a whole story arc with lots of pieces and lots of personalities, historical characters, and so on. It's not just whether someone I otherwise trust, has seen something which I know there might be other explanations for. It gets harder to explain things that have lots of historical pieces to them.
Yeah.
So at the very least, the story of Jesus is, obviously a lot more multi-complex, embedded into history with lots of written records and stuff that's way beyond just like a friend seeing a ghost. It also is a very different kind of thing, than just seeing a ghost. But anyway, not all of it is just, not every part of it is just a supernatural event or whatever. But so I'm not sure if you're just talking about like analogizing it to, say, trusting God just in general, then yeah, obviously a person who comes to believe in God, whatever their reasons are, presumably they're going to have reasons. I think most people have reasons for why they believe in God. They're not just truly taking it as if someone else said it. I think most people who do believe in God have a sort of intuitive sense that God is real. Whether they do agree with their reasons or not, they have reasons. They think the world makes better sense on God than it does without God, or what have you. And if they also believe in that God has revealed himself and done things or revealed his character, those things would play in. But if you got to a point where, to use your ghost thing, I guess, where God said something, like in this case, said something was true, but you found it hard to believe, then, so I'm not sure if that's what you're trying to drive at.
I think a problem with maybe our current understanding of this conversation right now is that we're talking a lot in like general terms, and if we were to like do a Bible study, which I mean I've told people in the past that I'm always down for. I've gone to Bible studies many times as an atheist, even recently, and I feel like that's something that I could do if you were making a specific claim on something that had happened, and we could sit down and look at all the evidence, then maybe there would be a better understanding of what we're getting at when we talk about, like, faith or whatever, we're trying to talk about right now.
Yeah.
But whenever you're just kind of talking about things as general, like, well, there is a lot of evidence for certain stories like that, so that's what I mean by that. It's kind of hard to conceptualize, I guess, what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's too. Yeah, I was just trying to figure out the analogy. You were the one who gave the analogy, so I was trying to figure out how you thought what that was analogizing to, I guess, was the question. Because the thing you shared about your friend, that you trust, but they saw a ghost.
Sure, that was a complete trust in somebody that I have. Yeah. That's what I meant by that.
Because I'm thinking, like, my first thought is sort of like, I'd have hesitation, like probably most people would. Did they really see a ghost? I mean, I can't say I would rule that out, for sure. But just because if you have a really high trust and they seem like they're totally sincere, they saw a ghost, like it would certainly challenge me at some level to have to think about it and not just be totally dismissive of it. But I don't.
Well, so it's not that I'm dismissive. I just want to make that clear. It's any claim that you come to me with. I'm not saying that I necessarily think you're wrong.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, let's explore it. Let's see all the evidence there is to see, and then I'll make a decision. It's not that I'm immediately saying that it is wrong. Yeah. It's kind of like just the claim of like atheism. It's not. I'm never saying that God doesn't exist. I'm just saying that I'm not convinced that he does. Right. Mm-hmm. So, that's all really it is for me. Is not like if a friend told me in that analogy that he saw a ghost, I would need to see more evidence. Then I wouldn't believe him until I saw more evidence. I would begin that journey, though, of exploring it with him.
Yeah, exactly. Because it shows how you could say you have complete trust in somebody, but really complete doesn't mean you then just shut off your mind. Like you don't exercise some measure of skepticism. And I really think that I don't relate to that as a Christian. I'm just being honest. So I do feel like I hear Christians do that a lot. I don't relate to it. Meaning I don't find it possible to shut off my mind. If I'm skeptical about something, I'm skeptical. Mm-hmm. I don't feel like any need to pretend I'm not skeptical. If I don't understand something, I don't understand it. So I feel like I just would say I don't understand it, or I don't know, or what have you. There are some aspects of trust, of faith, that can be virtuous, where you have your spouse, and there's things that you don't really understand the whole picture, but you trust them, and it seems reasonable to trust them. It's not like it's madness or whatever to trust them. And in the case of God, this is where all analogies will fail in one sense, because God is absolute to the Christian. God is, like, by definition, God is the most trustworthy. So there's not going to be any full analogy to a human being, because God is worthy of full trust. But at the same time, the reasonable retort to that is going to be, well, yeah, what if he asked you to sacrifice your son, like in the case of Abraham, Like this would seem like madness.
Mm-hmm.
So, that was,
So God is complete trust by definition, you would say?
I would say that God, since he's the author of our mind and so on, we have every good reason to trust him completely, to trust him fully. So where he speaks clearly, then we'd have reason to trust fully in him. Yes, if that's what you meant.
Okay. Just to make sure that that's what you're saying. All right.
Yeah. And
I don't agree, but I understand what you're saying.
yeah. Well, what's the bit you wouldn't agree with there? In other words, granting God is who he is, like the way the Christian understands God, the creator of us, of all things, the ultimate good, the source of all that's good and all that's true and so on. Why wouldn't he, if that were true, it's a big if, I understand, but if that were true, why wouldn't he be worthy of complete trust at that point?
So could you imagine a being that is the creator of everything, that wouldn't be completely trustworthy?
Could I imagine a being? No. In the sense that, could I imagine God? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so, just because assuming he's the source of all that's good and wise and true and the source of my very...
How do I...
the source of like the very faculty of trust and so on, then I would say, no, I can't imagine that God being not fully worthy of trust. Can I imagine a being who's really powerful, who is imperfect, who's not fully wise or fully good, that I don't fully trust? Yes.
And so how do we know how to differentiate between the two?
Well, I said if that God exists, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. So if he, I mean,
So-
the God of the Bibles is that God. Whether he exists or not, I'm totally setting aside
Sure.
our discussion, because we're talking about faith, the nature of faith. And I'm saying, if we're talking about faith in the sense of trust, like a complete trust that somebody, we have reasons to reach the point where we trust them even when we don't understand fully, that kind of trust.
So my understanding of every agent that can make decisions, that can do something, from my understanding, there's always the possibility that something is wrong, right? That they're not, I guess, perfect. So it's almost like our inability to imagine nothing, right? It's like you can't really fathom nothing, because as soon as you think about it, then, well, that's something. Perhaps in the same way that we can't imagine nothingness, there's no example of anything being perfect. Mm-hmm. So maybe that is not fathomable for me to understand. And so to have, that concept of that being, would I completely trust that being? Well, I don't know, because I don't have any example of that. So it's really hard to...
I mean, at that point, it's just it's just a concept, right?
Yeah.
I think it's conceivable. Most people don't seem to struggle with it being conceivable. They might struggle with whether it's true, for sure, right? There's obviously people struggle with whether it's true. But conceivable would be a smaller group of people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even atheists that I talk to, I wouldn't say I hear a lot that God is sort of like inconceivable. But I do think that I'm not trying to criticize that. I'm just saying that would be an even smaller group. Just
Sure.
And so yes, I for me, who obviously thinks God is at least conceivable, the idea of him as normally presented in the Bible and historically, classical theism, whatever you want to call it, that guy would be fully worthy of trust, because on what grounds would I have to doubt? That's not to say a person wouldn't experience doubt, or a person wouldn't have questions and so on. But
so I'm just trying to think of this concept of a God that would be completely trustworthy. Whenever I think about the God represented in the Bible, that is far removed from anything that is completely trustworthy or completely good.
You mean that the claim? I mean, the claim of him is that he's got these attributes: that he's the creator, he's the only creator, that he's all wise and all good, and so on. You're not questioning that that's its claim, right? You're saying you question that he actually acts that way. Is that what I'm understanding you to say, or am I misunderstanding what you mean?
Yes, that he actually acts that way. I mean, the way that events happen in the Bible from Yahweh, I don't understand how anyone could say that is the paramount and of good and trustworthiness. Having to command genocide, having to do all these terrible acts in the Bible, and then that's actually perfect goodness. So that doesn't make any sense to me.
Just for clarity, you're saying that in his deeds or whatever, he's not the perfection that is claimed of him, but you're not really questioning that he's treated as if he's all good. And
sure. People say that, and it doesn't make any sense to me that someone would claim that.
Yeah.
As much as
I meant that in the scriptures themselves. I meant, like if you want to just say the character, like the character in a story, right? The character of God in these stories is that he's being presented by the writers as the perfection of goodness, the source of everything. I mean, obviously he created everything, so everything that is good came out of him, right?
And everything evil, yeah.
Well, no, it doesn't. It doesn't assert that, right? It doesn't assert that he say that again. That
everything came from God.
Yes, everything came from
everything good and evil. Then
yes, everything the evil came from God. But I just what I meant was he's clearly not presented as the cause of evil.
How is he not, though?
Well, again, I'm saying he's clearly presented as not the cause of evil, right?
I don't know. I don't know if I would even agree with that, though, because if he's presented as the one that creates everything, then that begs then yes, he is the one that is all good and all evil. It's almost like cutting off half of a quote.
I don't think that I mean, maybe I'm unless I'm misunderstanding you, I don't think it's a very common view for people who read the Bible that God is presented as the source of all that's evil, in the sense that he's the cause of all that's evil. I think it's that the way evil is presented is that God created everything good, and that evil came as a result of people or beings choosing to turn away from God.
That he created.
Yes. But I mean, it's so I mean, I guess at this point we're just discussing whether you're saying, I mean, how it sounds like you're just saying God is sort of like himself not all good, right? That's clearly not the way he's presented as a character in the Bible. That's what I'm saying.
No, I understand.
I get that you're I'm not trying to question or challenge that you're saying God does things that you perceive as bad. You see them as bad, for sure. I'm not
Yeah.
even
So
questioning that. What I'm
I will
saying
say
is the way he's presented is not like the cause of evil. He
I
didn't
understand
create.
what.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I'm not sure if I agree with that, though.
So you're saying you think that the author, like of Genesis, meant to present God as causing the evil, like he, in that sense that.
I think the author of Genesis attributed, blame to Adam and
God.
Eve in a
Oh,
sense, like the serpent to some extent. Um,
I mean, God is not
but
held. God holds them responsible for their evil, right? But God, the writer's not treating God as if he's responsible for evil anywhere, right?
to me, it's just like it logically follows. But I mean, it doesn't say in the Bible, Genesis 1, whatever, God is evil. So I feel like we can continue with what you're saying, but I'm not
Yeah.
sure if I
Like you could
yeah.
say, "Oh, this is philosophically inconsistent or logically inconsistent," or there's different ways a person could go with that narrative. What I'm trying to drive at is that the way God's presented, this is hardly controversial, right? Within the history of theology or whatever, that God is altogether good. And
Keep in
he's
mind, I'm not someone that takes anything on just because it's not controversial doesn't mean it shouldn't be questioned.
true. Yeah, that's good. That's good. That's good. I don't blame you for that. But what I meant is that yeah, that's true. It's not just an argument just because it's common view. But what I should say to get right at the text itself is to say in the text, right, in the narratives, there's a lot of evil that's accomplished, a lot of things that are done that are evil, and none of them are attributed to God. The writer's
So
either the writer is presenting people as choosing evil that's clearly wrong, or that people do evil that God himself highlights as being wrong. But the
what
writer is assuming that what God is doing is altogether good at every stage. So what would you disagree with about that? The writer is presenting God's actions, his words, as altogether good at every stage of the story. What would be a thing he did in Genesis? Let's just isolate it to try and be specific. That he did that the writer is presenting as being an evil.
so I was gonna bring up actually a verse in Isaiah, but it just that I guess maybe you can get into the context of what the translations actually are. Maybe that's where you would go into it. But say like Isaiah 45:7, which I just pulled up. I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I am the Lord who does all these things.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I make peace and create evil. I am the Lord who does all these things. So, wouldn't that be a God that also creates evil? I'm not. See, to me, I didn't think that was really contentious. I thought just if all things come from God, that includes all things good and evil. But that doesn't. I thought the idea was like God himself isn't evil, but that evil did come from him, that he created it, maybe. So I thought maybe I didn't think that was the contentious part about what I was saying, but yeah, I am saying that God created evil. I think there's more verses I could probably find pretty fast.
Yeah. I mean, so I think I would differentiate between what Isaiah is talking about in his prophecies and what his prophecies are about and what he means by creating evil and creating light and creating darkness in the context of the passages throughout Isaiah that I don't think are that hard to follow personally, as to what God's referring to, what are the things specifically he's referring to. But what I don't think it means is that he's purposed to bring about evil in the world as like an end in itself. like he's just another version of the devil in the story, like clearly the devil is, or the serpent, if you want to go back to Genesis, or pick a character who's choosing to do evil, Pharaoh or something like that. Someone who's clearly in the story is clearly doing things that are evil, right? But God is not presented as if he's another one of these type of beings who is doing evil. He's presented as the only one who's actually doing good, who's ultimately accomplishing good, whose entire aim in the creation from the beginning is good. And I think of that as pretty basic, but I understand if that's something you're challenging, then yes, you're right to have to then probe into the stories, into the narratives, and the burden would be on you, I think, at that point to kind of show like where if you're just starting with the foundational books, like the Pentateuch or something, just where you get introduced to the character of God, before you go on into all the different the later books and so on, and the history of Israel and the particular things that happen there. I would think would seem pretty clear to me, but again, you'd have to come up with something there. Like even the sacrifice of Isaac is not presented as if God is doing something evil. God is doing something good. According to the writer, I think it's clear that God is doing something good.
Yeah, sure. According to the writer, I do agree with that he presents that as doing something good. And of course, I would disagree with what the writer is saying. So I think we're on the same page with that.
Yeah.
I do not believe that maybe we're on the same page that none of the writers said that God created evil. Because of like the verse height. And there's also many other, I think that's a whole separate thing that we could probably talk about for hours and do a whole Bible study on, and whether or not even, if God is the only God in the Bible, and, because there's Yahweh and, were there more, gods and stuff like that. We could really dive into that someday, but, yeah, I feel like that would be a whole different topic of discussion.
Yeah, it's a good, of course, within Christianity, there's a whole theological dispute about how to understand evil, right? The general view is that evil isn't a thing. That's the tradition, like orthodoxy, what's considered orthodoxy theologically, has been the view that that evil is not an actual thing that God created, like the way something that is good is created. And the typical way of describing that is the way we describe physical phenomena, that cold is not really something, it's just the absence of something else. Darkness isn't something, it's the absence of something else that actually exists. And so evil is usually described theologically as a nothing. It's not something that was created like the way light was created, or the sun, or the stars, or an elephant. It's the absence of something. So that's usually
you could almost think of darkness and coldness as defaults, though, right? Things are naturally cold until you add heat. Things are naturally dark until you add light. So are all things naturally evil until you add goodness?
No, it's that it's more the opposite, that they were created good. I mean, if you're looking at Genesis, right, everything's created and it's good. That's like a big part of the story, is God pauses to comment that what he has created is good.
Oh, I see. So you're saying that light is the cold. Light is the darkness.
Light is good, right? Like what he creates is good. And then he comments on it that it's good, right?
Yeah.
So my point is just that on its face, the things he created are good. And then where you get sin that enters in, that's not something that he created, in the sense that he created these other things that he called good. This is something that clearly the world had the potential. Clearly there's the moral potential for sin within human beings. That's obvious from the story. And he didn't create human beings as that they're already doing wrong, from day one. They fall into sin, the fall, and so just the way, if you're trying to figure out what does the narrator mean by this, what's the presentation of God in this context, it's that, well, the choice that the serpent made, the choice that the humans made, they're held morally culpable for or blameworthy for. They have introduced something that's wrong. That's what's called sin. God uses the term sin, right, in the case of Cain and so on. And this thing is, it's not that God purposed that this is what he wanted to bring about. It's more like a defect or a default that comes out of his creation. And yes, he obviously created the world to allow that, to have that potential.
He knew as soon as he created everything that would happen, though, right?
Yes, of course. And yes, of course. But I mean, as far as going back to the original thing, and there's lots of theological and even philosophical disputes about how to then properly understand that, for sure. We were back to this original idea, and it's probably a good place to close, I think. It was just this original idea of you saying, I don't think I could even, I can't even really conceive that God has the perfection of goodness, of wisdom, of whatever else, that he would be fully trustworthy. Isn't that where we sort of started this discussion about the various narratives and so on?
This last part of the interview, yeah, I'm not sure if I could conceive of a being that falls into that category.
And then you were also contesting maybe the Bible itself isn't really presenting God as actually fully good or fully trustworthy, right? That was the next thing.
Yeah, that's my take on it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then you brought up the verse from Isaiah, and then we were discussing about that. So, yeah, I think that gives a lot of people stuff to think about, right?
Yeah.
Because now, if you were a smart Christian and you were listening to this interview, you would say, okay, I want to test this idea out. How is God presented in these various books? Is he presented as fully trustworthy? Is he presented even as fully good, and so on? And what do I make of this verse in Isaiah and some of these other verses? I think that would be the way a Christian should naturally kind of respond if they were listening to the interview. And yeah, great. Really appreciate.
Yeah. I could even look more into it and get back to you and email you about that too.
Yeah. It'd be great. Well, we cross post the interviews on YouTube, so by all means head over there and be respectful of both Clinton and me, and try to deal with ideas, because we're trying to really appreciate Clinton being on here and sharing his ideas and what he's been through, and it seems to me like we want to we'll at least ignore you if you comment over there on some, rather than just trying to get into the ideas. You just comment on nonsense stuff, we're just going to ignore you. So, but by all means, get over there and scrutinize faith alongside Clinton and me. So, Clinton, thanks for being here.
Thank you.